Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tonight on World Talks, we analyse the latest developments in Iran, where nationwide protests face deadly crackdowns amid an extended internet blackout. Tensions escalate as US President Donald Trump announces a 25% tariff on any business with Iran, signalling maximum economic pressure. He has also ordered personnel from US bases in the Middle East to be evacuated. The world watches closely as Iran's leadership braces for unrest while diplomatic channels remain partially open. Joining us is Nassim Abi Ghanem, a Middle East expert at the Bard College in Berlin, to discuss the risks, responses and implications for US and global policy. Mr. Abi Ghanem, welcome to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So, things are moving rather rapidly in Iran. Your view of the big picture at the moment?
Well, yes, indeed, it has moved quite fast, and one cannot just look at the events in Iran without embedded in the more regional events that have been occurring in Gaza and Lebanon, in Syria and elsewhere. And of course, as the pressure on multiple Iranian allies and proxies in the region has mounted over the past couple of years, the protests were an inevitable outcome of that. Now, we have to also stress that these protests are not super new. They've been accumulating over the past 10 years. We've had movements for women protests on women's rights. We've had other protests earlier in mid 2010s for economic rights. And so these have been, it's an accumulation of several grievances from the Iranian people. And so, of course, as this came to fruition, we all know how the ICRG and the Basij would respond to such protests, and that was expected that it would turn into a violent crashing.
Right. Okay. So let me just pause you there for a second. Because a couple of things that I want to dig into a little bit more. Yes, there have been protests, and yes, in the past, the response by the regime has been violent, and there have been deaths. But this time, the spark for the protest was economic. But this seems to have expanded its profile to people calling for the stepping down of the regime. On top of that, the level of violence against the protesters seems much higher than before. Is this time different?
Yes, certainly the intensity is much higher. And again, with the backdrop of all what the Iranians have been involved in the region, sponsoring other proxies in the region, spending billions of dollars to prompt Hezbollah or the Hamas combatants. Of course, the citizens have felt how much they've been left behind, how much they haven't been looked after. And certainly the intensity of the protests this time is unquestioned, and it's much higher than previously. And that is why the entire regime is put into question, because these are the policies and the strategic positions of the entire regime for the region.
Right. I want to come to Iran's support for their proxies across the region in just a second. But the actual power on the street and a lot of the political power is held by the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, who are well embedded into every economic and largely political decision within Iran. They're not going to give up their power that easily, are they?
I fear not. I mean, we've seen Iranian allies in the region also being under pressure, and we've seen how violent and brutally they respond to that. And I would be very fearful that the IRGC would follow suit in the same kind of strategy. It would be very optimistic of us to think that they would just lay their arms on the side and not crack down on the protesters for any reason. And so I do fear that as this continues, and I mean, now we are in a pause, of course, but if this is to pick up again, I do fear that they will not just lay their arms aside unless the international pressure mounts super strongly on them.
So talk about international pressure. President Trump threatened to take, well, what we assumed was going to be military action if the killings in Iran didn't stop. Bases in the Middle East were evacuated, although they're currently on pause, those evacuations. And it seems as though Iran has backed down a bit. No executions are being carried out. Now, clearly, Iran is going to present this in a different way. But what does that tell you, the fact that, you know, the executions have been paused, if not halted?
Well, I mean, this needs to be very closely observed from the watchdogs and the NGOs on the ground to see that actually the Iranian regime would follow through on these promises. Now, I fear that with transparency on all ends, this is going to be questionable, and I do fear that the backtrack of President Trump on that might have to do with other side deals that the Iranian regime has provided for President Trump to ensure that this is backtracked and that an actual attack will not happen. But of course, this needs to be if the promise is that there will not be any executions or arrests, then this needs to be very much observed through these local watchdogs. And the question then becomes, with internet blackout and other media blackouts, how sure are we that we will be able to observe all these internationally? And then we need to also observe what will happen again in the region. Which of the bargaining chips has Iran actually let go of in favor of prompting and sustaining the regime?
Right. So let's talk about those proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and others who for many years have been supported by the Iranian regime. Talk us through how what's going on in Iran right now is pressurizing these groups.
So the pressure is both ways. I would also say that the pressure has started from the pressuring of the proxies through the several military operations on Hezbollah and the Houthis in Lebanon and Yemen. And of course, that inevitably required that in order to maintain and sustain these proxies, more funneling of funds needs to be pumped for reconstruction, for medical services, maintaining the lives and the families of the combatants that work within both militant groups. And so, as such, this has also burdened the Iranian regime financially. And that was, of course, noticeable in Tehran and elsewhere in Iran. At the same time, the Israeli government has made it very clear that their immediate concern and their major concern is their borders with Lebanon and the closest, which would be with Yemen, to be protected. And there is where some of the bargaining chips for Iran still exists, in terms of there's a strong demand for Hezbollah to disarm in Lebanon, and same for the Houthis in Yemen. And so there is where some of the side deals could have occurred with Tehran.
So certainly a complex picture, yeah. Mr. Abi Ghanem. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. The clock has beaten us, but do come and see us again soon. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.